China is shaping up to be ruining their prospects for competing properly on the international stage. So let's say you are, let's say Greenland. I'll pick a ridiculous example. And no, I don't think that anything I say about Greenland is likely to happen or realistic. Just an example. Let's say Greenland has an option of dealing with the United States or dealing with China on some future business, whatever that business is. Who are they going to trust? Well, you shouldn't trust anybody. You should always put yourself in a position where trust is not that necessary, if you can, but you always have to have a little. And I would argue that the United States is in a stronger position in terms of the Dutch model of we're going to do what we say we're going to do, and you can trust us to do a deal. China's running in the opposite direction, and it looks very much like China is creating a brand that you wouldn't want to do business with. There's a fake news story today that China has signaled on Monday, meaning today, that it was now seeking a calm end to its ongoing trade war with the U.S. They're seeking a calm end to the trade war. And so our stock market went up. What exactly does that mean? They want a calm end to the trade war. Nothing. It doesn't mean anything. Who doesn't want an end to problems? You might as well not even have asked the Chinese. Should have gone and say, hey, we need a quote for our story. Say something about the trade war. We wish we didn't have one? Great. I'll tell that story and our stock market will zoom. There's no actual news there. Apparently the Chinese have the same position they always had. It means absolutely nothing. So, here's my prediction on the trade negotiations with China. There will be no trade deal. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week, not by the end of the Trump administration, and not by the end of, a second term specifically. Maybe not after that. You don't want to say never because never is a long time. But I don't think that we're heading toward an agreement. I think we're heading toward a divestiture, meaning just separating our ways. It'll take a while. Until then, we can just tariff each other and rattle our sabers and stuff like that. So I say no trade agreement with China is forthcoming. And here's the surprising part. You might not know the difference. You may never know the difference. There will certainly be individual companies that are going to get hit hard, and nobody's happy about that. Very unfair, because companies build a business around a certain set of international assumptions, and they should be able to depend on that. But apparently in our world, they cannot depend on China to be a good player. Now, there's a bigger thing happening here. I haven't talked about this before. Yeah, every now and then I have a topic that I think, well, this could totally end my career and destroy my reputation forever, but let's do it. I'm game, if you are. Let's take some risk. So I told you I've been reading this great book called American Nations about the founding of this country and some of the cultures and influences during the colonial days and earlier. What formed the country? One of the most striking things is how New York City was formed. I guess it was the Dutch who were the primary settlers of New York City originally. And the Dutch brought with them let's say a business philosophy, if that's the best, maybe a business set of manners, expectations. I don't know exactly what to call it, but a belief system and a set of preferences around how to do business. And the primary thing or things that they held as important were that if you have money, I'll talk to you. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal in 2019, does it? If you have money, maybe we can do business. That just sounds like that's just what business is. But you have to take yourself back in time all the way to the days when slavery was common. I mean, if you can even wrap your head around that slavery was common. Doing business with everybody just because they had money, even if they were a different religion, different anything, was a big, big deal. And it's what allowed commerce to work. Now, part of that is trust. So it's not good enough to say, yeah, I'll do business with anybody. The anybody that you plan to do business with has to trust that if you give them money, they'll give you a product, and that the product will be roughly what it was they promised they'd give you, or else they'll make it good. So a certain set of sort of very 2019 customer-focused ways of looking at things. Now, I may be over-interpreting a little bit what things were like back then, but the basic idea is that there were a set of assumptions about trustworthiness, about transparency in your deals, in making sure that both sides got a good deal, and in dealing with everybody. If money was involved, that's all we care about. We don't care about your religion, don't care about anything. Do you have money, yes or no? So that was a super powerful set of ideas that I would argue has powered the United States for a few hundred years. And when somebody from the United States comes into the room and says, I'd like to make a deal, that person from the United States, no matter who they are, brings with them the entire history of the United States. Think about that. If you're an American and you go to another country and you want to make a business deal, you're not there alone. You are there with the entire history of the United States as part of your brand. And when you go in there and say, I'm going to be good to you, if you make a deal and something goes wrong, I'm going to fix it, the person on the other side, they're going to say, if this wasn't some crazy American saying that, I wouldn't believe that at all. But I actually believe that these crazy Americans, they understand that making the customer happy is how business grows. I think I'm going to trust this cat. I'm going to make a deal. So it's super powerful that Americans who go to do business overseas bring with them the entire history of the United States, which is in many ways a continuation of the Dutch philosophy that the money can be separated from all of your other bigotry, if I could put it that way. Now take China. China is in the midst of, let's say, this long-term shift in brand from communist to capitalist with a dictatorship sort of situation. I'm not sure what you'd call China exactly. There's nothing quite like China. And they're developing their brand, for which every Chinese business person who wants to leave the country and do a deal is going to be taking with them. So all Chinese business people will be bringing with them the brand of China and China's history of doing business. And if you don't trust China, you're not going to trust that individual business person who wants to make a deal. And at the moment, China is looking pretty what would you say? They're being discredited by their actions in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong was a deal. And it's a big deal. It's one of the most noticeable, high level, everybody knows about it, deals in the history of all deals. There have been big deals in the world, but the deal in which the UK turned over Hong Kong and the terms with which they turned it over to China is one of the most notable agreements of all time. Now, the narrative at the moment, and I'm not close to the details, but this would be how the rest of the world sees it, is that China reneged on one of the most high-profile deals of all time. At the same time, and this is very bad timing for them, it appears that the reason that they won't do a deal with America, and the following statement I'm going to make, I don't know if it's true or accurate or leaves out too much context, but the way we see it, the way it's being presented to the U.S. public and to, I would imagine, to European allies as well, if they're watching the news. The way it's being presented is that we can't make a deal with China because they won't agree to stop stealing our IP, intellectual property. Now, I'm not saying that accurately characterizes the situation. It might. I mean, that might be exactly what's going on. But whether or not that's exactly true, or I would understand it differently if there were more context on it, what's important is this is becoming China's brand. So the 2019 China brand is, if you buy our Huawei equipment, we will spy on your country. Imagine having that in your brand. That your brand is, if you let our products into your country, your national security will be lessened. What could be worse for your brand? At the same time, they make a huge international deal with Hong Kong, and apparently they're breaking it right in front of the world. They're breaking the most high-profile deal you've ever seen. Right in front of us, they just are breaking the deal. Changed their mind. Now, if they had a better reason for it, it would look differently. Now, you saw President Trump broke our deal with Iran. But an objective person could look at the Iranian deal and say, why the hell did they make that deal in the first place? Or they could look at TPP and say, okay, the president broke that deal. But why was that deal even in place? It was so flawed. We saw the president broke at least got out of the Paris Accords on climate change. But again, reasonable people can say, well, it didn't make any difference. It just wasn't important that the United States was in or out because we lowered our output of CO2. Other countries didn't, and it didn't matter if we were in the agreement or not. So China is shaping up to be ruining their prospects for competing properly on the international stage. So let's say you are, let's say Greenland. I'll pick a ridiculous example. And no, I don't think that anything I say about Greenland is likely to happen or realistic. Just an example. Let's say Greenland has an option of dealing with the United States or dealing with China on some future business, whatever that business is. Who are they going to trust? Well, you shouldn't trust anybody. You should always put yourself in a position where trust is not that necessary, if you can, but you always have to have a little. And I would argue that the United States is in a stronger position in terms of the Dutch model of we're going to do what we say we're going to do, and you can trust us to do a deal. China's running in the opposite direction, and it looks very much like China is creating a brand that you wouldn't want to do business with. And they're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. All right. So the news that China signaled that it might want to, calm down the trade war doesn't mean anything. They don't show any willingness to work with us. And therefore, we should not work with them. We should not. You saw the story that the U.S., I guess was the customs people, they captured something like 23 tons of fentanyl coming in through a Mexican seaport, but it came from China. That's right. China sent, in one shipment, China sent enough fentanyl through Mexico to end up in the United States to kill half of the planet. I think somebody calculated that over 5 billion people could die of an overdose from that amount. Now, some people have asked, is that an amount you would send for recreational use? Is that amount of tonnage what you would expect to see if it was normal drug traffic? Enough to kill 5 billion people? Or is that weapons of mass destruction level? Because just in quantity, it looks like massive weapons of mass destruction. I'm not going to suggest any ideas for how to weaponize that. They have their own, I'm sure. So yeah, without making any suggestions how they might use that, should we see that as just a drug problem? Because apparently China's, some officials said, hey, United States, you should work on your demand and lower your demand. Yeah, we should lower our demand. Of course, that doesn't, understand that most of the people who take fentanyl don't even know they're taking it. So it'd be hard to reduce the demand for something that you didn't know you were consuming in the first place, because the fentanyl gets put in other pills that you think are other drugs. That's how people die from overdoses. They don't know they're getting fentanyl in the first place. If they did, they wouldn't take so much, presumably. So I got a real question about what 23 tons of fentanyl shipped into this country is intended to do. Is it intended for political instability? Is it intended as a trade negotiation tactic? Is it a weapon of mass destruction? Is it just to destabilize the entire government? What the heck is 23 tons of fentanyl for? But it all gets back to the same thing, that China, because it's knowingly shipping this in. I say knowingly because the government of China knows who makes the fentanyl precursors. They know who they are. We know who they are. We know their actual names and probably their addresses. So China certainly knows it. And they could stop at anything they want. Just go over there and close the factory, arrest the people. They could do it any time. So it's intentional, and this is not a country that we can do business with. So I'm gonna take China out in the place that it hurts the most. China is not a country you can trust for business. Bam. China is not a country you can trust for business. That's way more damaging to them than saying you can't trust them militarily, which everybody already knew, because nobody really trusts anybody militarily. That's why you have a military. If you could trust people, you wouldn't need a military in the first place. But China is no longer a country that other countries should trust to do business. They're shipping 23 tons of fentanyl into a country that should be their customer for legitimate products. If you were IBM and you were doing business with another company and they were buying your IBM products, and then IBM said, I think I'll just send a few tons of fentanyl to the employees of your company. Why? I don't know. Maybe I don't like your employees. Would you still do business with IBM if they poisoned tens of thousands of the employees of your company? No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. Would you make a deal with IBM if IBM made a deal and then just broke it? No, you wouldn't. I think I've told you this story before. Early in my career, I was a contract negotiator. So it was actually my job to negotiate contracts with vendors for the big bank I worked at. And I was negotiating with IBM. They were going to provide the big expensive computers that we needed for our data center. And I was negotiating that deal. And they wouldn't negotiate. I would say, okay, here are the things we want in our contract. And IBM would look at me and they'd say, no, we don't do any of that. And I'd say, no, we need these things, because what would happen if we buy your product and it doesn't perform? And the IBM representatives looked at me and they said, if it doesn't perform, we'd fix it. And I'd say, no, I need this in the contract. And they'd say, no, we don't do that. We're IBM. Here's the deal. If it needs to be in a contract, you should be dealing with another company. In other words, IBM was so dependable and had such a track record of doing whatever it took to make the customer happy that putting it in a contract would actually lessen their credibility. Because why do you have to write it down? If you don't trust IBM enough that they'll go fix it, don't do business with them. So what happened? In the end, my boss allowed me to make the deal without getting what I thought were normal contract requirements. And sure enough, something went pretty wrong. We got the computers. I don't remember the exact problem, but something didn't work. we didn't have the right mix or something. What did IBM do? Whatever it took. Whatever it took. I don't remember exactly, but whatever people they had to send, they sent. Whatever money they needed to spend, they spent. And they did it right away. They did it fast. They did it completely. They never complained. And they never asked us for extra money. And they never said, look at the contract. That's it. Would I recommend IBM to another company? Hell yes. Hell yes. This happened, 25 years ago. I would still recommend IBM to anybody. Absolutely. Because they brought with them the history of IBM. If you were, and there were famous stories of IBM employees who, I think the story, it became sort of a legend, so who knows if it was even a real story, about some IBM employee who once, was trying to fix a customer's problem, and he worked overnight. And he was so exhausted that, he'd been up for 24 hours, so he couldn't fix the problem, but he had to sleep. And so he went home and took a nap, and he was fired immediately because he left the customer, period. I don't know if that story was even true, right? Those stories get exaggerated. But if you're dealing with a country whose history has that story in it, that they're going to fire their employee who, if he even takes a nap while you still have a problem, that's a company you want to deal with, right? China? No. I don't want their Huawei products that might be spying on me. I don't want to make a deal with them if they can't make a deal with Hong Kong, if they can't keep a deal with Hong Kong. And I absolutely don't want to do a trade deal with them if they don't have any interest in something that looks balanced.